Welcome back. Today we are going to look at your digestive system. So let's start at the beginning. Let's look and see what the digestive system is. The digestive system, or the GI tract or gastrointestinal tract, is basically a tube from mouth to anus. Mouth, pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, different parts of the small intestine, the different parts of the large intestine, the rectum and anus. That is what food is traveling through. There are a number of accessory structures that aid those main GI tract structures: teeth, tongue, salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. There will be some generalities when it comes to it from a histology standpoint. And then we'll have some specializations that we'll see, only in the stomach or only in the small intestine. And we'll talk about those when we get there. But basically, it's one all long tube. There's a hole in the middle, and this is the lumen, like it is on any other tubular structure. And this is where we're going to be breaking down our foods into our basic building blocks. Then we can absorb them, and then we can utilize them, and we'll look at that at the very end. Again, one big long tube, but the accessory assist, and there they all are. We'll talk about them later. When it comes to functions here, this isn't earth-shattering stuff. They are involved in ingestion. What is ingestion? Getting these things from the oral cavity down into the bowels of the GI tract. Here in the mouth, this is really the first step in the digestion process. There's a little bit of absorption that occurs in the mouth, but not really. Food doesn't stay there that long. It's involved with mechanical breakdown of food. Motility. There are a couple different types of movements associated with the digestive tract. There is a net movement forward through the system, and then there's a, for lack of a better word, shimmying back and forth, where we rock the mucosa back and forth like that. And that helps to kind of break down or increase the surface area of the chunks of food that we swallow down. It has secretions. There are a number of secretions, a number of digestive enzymes, acid, bile, hormones. There's a whole bunch of stuff that gets secreted. We'll talk about some of those major players as we go on throughout the track here. Digestion. Ingestion is getting that food to get back down. So, we're going to be using our cheeks, our tongue, our teeth to kind of hold and get that stuff to be pushed back down towards the throat. But digestion, we have different types of digestion. We have mechanical digestion. This is where you physically break it down. Pretty easy. Chewing, mashing, mixing. Those would be mechanical digestion. Chemical digestion is when we get enzymes involved to break things down into their component parts, into their monosubunits, okay? Getting carbohydrates down to glucose, getting triglycerides down to free fatty acids and glycerol, getting proteins down to their individual amino acids, if at all possible. Absorbing all those monos in, and we'll look at that at the very end. And then obviously, whatever we cannot use, we have to get rid of. Elimination. When we look at the GI tract from a histology standpoint, all of them have these four tunics, these four layers: the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis, and the adventitia, or sometimes it's referred to as serosa. Now, the GI tract from stem to stern has all of these there. Now, as we get to some of the individual structures, like the stomach especially, we are going to have a slight deviation from that. It'll have all the four and a little extra. And each major area of the GI tract will have a slight variation for what its function is. You see a number of adaptations in the small intestine because that's where the absorption of nutrients primarily occurs. Yes, a little bit occurs in the stomach. Yes, a little bit occurs in the large intestine. But for all intents and purposes, the vast majority of all your nutrient absorption occurs in the small intestine. So we're going to have some adaptations in there that allow for that function to occur. So let's look at all of these layers. I'll highlight some things that are very specific, found only there in these little tunics, or some secretions. Those would be things that I would pay attention to. So the innermost lining is the mucosa. The mucosa comes in contact with the lumen. And it's symbocolumnar in areas. It'll be stratified, squamous in some regions. Okay, so it does vary a little bit from one region to the next. But again, this is the innermost lining. As you can kind of see, there's like a lamina propria there that's right underneath it. I guess if there was anything you should know about the lamina propria, it is where we are going to get some absorption. Getting them into either the circulatory system or the lymphatic system, depending upon is it water soluble or lipid soluble. Your big lipids, your lipid soluble vitamins, they go into the lymphatic system in the lacteal and then ultimately delivered into the blood up by the subclavians, where all lymphatic fluid gets dumped into, right? Water-soluble vitamins, some small water-soluble units like amino acids, carbohydrates, even some very small chain lipids, they can be absorbed into the capillary system. And then we have a little bit of muscle here as well called the muscularis mucosae. And this basically provides a twitch. That's it. They're not involved with peristalsis or segmentation like the muscular layer is, but they do provide a twitch. So if food particles get stuck on top of the cells in the region here, a twitch will occur, and that will kind of help to secrete stuff out of the individual cells, out of the epithelium. But that little twitch will help to kind of get stuff moving along. In the submucosa here, it's areolar, it's dense, irregular connective tissue. I don't know if that's necessarily a good question, but there is nervous input in, okay? We're going to have nervous input in a few different regions, okay? This is one of them. This submucosal nerve plexus does a couple things. One, it helps to trigger glandular secretions. So there's going to, again, like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a number of secretions that are occurring there. These happen by glands, obviously. And this submucosal nerve plexus is going to be associated with those guys. It does also, cause that twitch in that muscularis mucosae as well. MALT is going to be found here, our mucus-associated lymphoid tissue. So there's that. And another major thing here, guys, is Peyer's patches. All right. These are some specific lymphatic nodules that are found in the small intestine, specifically in the distal portion of the large intestine, small intestine, the ileum specifically. And when we talk about the function of the small intestine later, we'll see why these are only found in the distal part and not the proximal part, not the duodenum. So we'll see that later. The muscular layer has its own nerve plexus, okay? So the muscular layer has its own nerve plexus called the myenteric nerve plexus. Excuse me. And in the GI tract from stem to stern, except for in one specific location, we will have an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer of muscle. Okay. Longitudinal layer is what is involved with segmentation. The intercircular layer is going to be involved with peristalsis. These are on the next slide, I believe. Segmentation is that shimmying back and forth. Okay, so we get changes in lengthwise that way. And the intercircular layer is like a sphincter muscle. It closes and helps to push stuff forward through the system, prevents it from going backwards. There are going to be a number of thickened ringed portions of smooth muscle. These are called sphincters. There's a number of them. They're fabulous. They're fantastic. And we'll be talking about them later. It is all supplied by what's called the enteric nervous system. So the submucosal plexus, the myenteric plexus, it's this guy, okay? This is a subdivision of the autonomic nervous system. So it's smooth muscle. So I hope that you already are working under the assumption that this is smooth muscle. I can't control it. So therefore it's got to be autonomic, all right? And specifically, it's the enteric nervous system that goes and supplies the submucosal plexus and the myenteric plexus. Here is that mixing and propulsion. There it is, peristalsis. Okay. This is net movement forward. Okay. That's the fancy word for it. And this, I guess they're getting rid of the term. This is segmentation. Okay. And it's just mixing. And you can hopefully see on this picture, guys, here's the bolus of food that's been swallowed. Okay. And we are shimmying back and forth. And basically, what is that doing? I've taken that one bolus of food, and now what do I have? I have increased the surface area. This is increase surface area. And what do you think that does? Yep. If I have increased surface area, now I have more surface area for the enzymes to act upon. So this can help us to further digest and enhance absorption of nutrients throughout the digestive tract. The outermost layer, the last layer that we have here, guys, is the adventitia or serosa. And it's just connective tissue, areolar, connective tissue. In a couple different regions, it'll have some slightly different names. For us, in our studies, it doesn't matter. Outside the peritoneal cavity or inside the peritoneal cavity, there are some slight variations. These variations allow the individual to maintain proper position of the organs. Again, for us and what we're doing, we don't need to worry about the difference between the slight variation that exists between those, okay? At least I don't care. So here does a great job of showing you this mucosal layer, and there you can see some undulations, some adaptations. We have a submucosal plexus, really thin little layer of muscle, causing contraction of glands within the mucosae, and some twitches to occur as well. There's the muscularis, more robust. There's the muscular. And then here's the serosa or adventitia, depending upon if you are in or out of the peritoneal cavity. Ouch, 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 ouch. Already talked about the enteric nervous system, subdivision of the autonomic nervous system. So I don't really want to go into those. I apologize for repeating those. We have a number of nerves, right? We've had a number of nerves in the heart, lungs, respiratory system, blood vessels. So wouldn't it make sense that we would have a buttload of nervous type of input here? Of course. We have baroreceptors. They are what detect the stretch. As the bolus of food moves, causes an expansion or a stretch. That's going to trigger some relaxation on the front end and some constriction on the back end to get this thing to go forward through the system. Chemoreceptors, they monitor the chemicals, the amino acids, the carbohydrates, the triglycerides, vitamins and minerals. Okay, we'll have a number of chemoreceptors to help monitor those levels. We also are going to have hormones. Gastrin is going to be a major one. Cholecystokinin is a major secretion, major hormonal secretion. Okay, these are going to aid the digestive process. And we'll talk about more of those as we get to the regions where they get secreted and what they actually do with the digestion and absorption of nutrients. The last thing we got here in the introduction, boys and girls, is what is called the peritoneum. Everything, heart, lungs, digestive system, they all have stuff that wraps around them. And the peritoneum is the serous membrane that does it for our abdominal organs. We have parietal and visceral, just like we've had with everything else, okay? Parietal is what lines the cavity. Okay, our parietal peritoneum is what lines the abdominal wall. Our visceral peritoneum covers the organ surface. Just like parietal and visceral have done before. Parietal has always lined the cavity. Visceral has always covered the actual organ itself. Okay, nothing different here. We have a little potential space like we've had in every region that we've looked at since the nervous system. That's the peritoneal cavity. Potential space between the two layers, secretes a serous fluid, allows stuff to move. There's a lot of stuff in a small little space here, okay? As we bent over, we've obviously increased the pressure within it. I've increased where everything is squished on top of each other. Now bend over and you squish it even more. All that serous fluid allows the structures inside this abdominal cavity to move around and over each other. Also, think about pregnancy. Good Lord. Got a big 7-pound creature inside you. It allows all that stuff to move around easily. As we move on here, we are going to see that some structures are going to be completely covered in peritoneum, and there are going to be some that get pushed out of the peritoneal cavity, of the abdominal cavity, and only have one layer of peritoneal wrapping. These are referred to as intraperitoneal organs and retroperitoneal organs. Intra is within, completely surrounded by the visceral peritoneum. These are organs that are completely within the abdominal cavity there. Stomach, small intestine, at least most of it, and most of the, or some of the large intestine. So some parts and pieces kind of get squished and moved out. Perfectly fine. Okay, there's a lot of stuff in a very small little space. So as the development is occurring, and this is one of the last ones to develop along with the lungs, as these are finally making their final push to where they're going to end up, sometimes they kind of get pushed out of the abdominal cavity. Those ones that get pushed out, the ones that get pushed out are the retroperitoneal, okay? They are directly against the posterior abdominal wall. That means they don't have a covering on the backside. Only the anterior is covered with peritoneum. Duodenum is an example. The pancreas, the ascending and descending colon, and the rectum are examples of this phenomena. And I've only included digestive organs, okay? So we have these organs all within this abdominal cavity. We have wrappings around them, connective tissue wrappings around them called peritoneum. This is going to help hold and protect and do a bunch of fantastic things when it comes to these digestive organs. Some are wrapped on both sides. Those are intraperitoneal. Some are wrapped only on the front side because they kind of get pushed out, and those are retroperitoneal. As we look at the peritoneum, okay, wrapping on both sides, okay, the cavity and then the outer surface, there are some regions where that serous membrane fuses together. Where they fuse together, like in the brain, right? We have the dural folds. Two folds of the dura mater and the cranial vault fuse together and give us membranes, those folds. Same thing here. This is a great picture here because it shows you just, good God almighty, all those organs in that tiny little space there. They're not just floating around. They're anchored in place. They're anchored in place because the peritoneum fuses in spots and gives rise to what's called mesenteries. Mesenteries help to do a number of things. They support, they maintain where these things are, they house specific blood vessels. They're going to be involved in absorption of nutrients, doing a bunch of different things. There are several ones associated with this mesentery structure. The greater omentum is probably the most important one because it's the most obvious one. It's this apron sheet right here. It just drapes over all of the intestines, okay? Kind of, keeps the intestines where they're supposed to be. You can see it has some fatty tissue on it. It'll be involved with some absorption of nutrients, helps to isolate a leak. If for some reason there is some kind of leak, it can help to contain it a little bit, not a whole hell of a lot. But, unfortunately, though, if cancer touches it on one side, it can easily get across the entire abdominal cavity there as well. This hangs down from the greater curvature of the stomach and just hangs over all of the intestines. You have a lesser omentum. It hangs from the lesser curvature of the stomach and kind of goes back in that regard there. Helps to hold the stomach, helps to hold the liver, some of the duodenum as well. So helps to anchor those things together. We have a number of other ones as well. There's the falciform ligament. Helps to hold the liver in place, I guess. There's what's called mesocolons. There's a number of mesocolons. What do mesocolons do? These are going to hold portions of the large intestine, help to anchor them in place. Here's that mesentery proper. There you go. There's a transverse mesocolon right there. There's a sigmoid mesocolon down in here. So there's a lot of mesocolons. I just have a very blanket term for you guys. Here's that mesentery proper, and you can see it helps to hold the small intestine in place. So I guess those are specific. So I guess I would probably ask those. If the peritoneum does get inflamed and irritated, then that's peritonitis. And that would cause some pretty bad abdominal pain associated with that.